Hello, and welcome to the second worked example video for the verbal reasoning section of the UCAT My EdSpace series. Today, we are going to be looking at the inference and deduction free text worked examples. I'm Eleanor, I'm one of the English teachers at My EdSpace, and I'll be guiding you through preparing for the verbal reasoning section of the UCAT. So I've made an entire video on the types and definition and examples of the inference and deduction questions for free text questions in the verbal reasoning section. But just to review, in case this is your first time seeing this, these are the types of questions that identify what logically follows from the information, even if not explicitly stated. So you're required to do some critical thinking here and some verbal reasoning here, as you're asked to draw conclusions based on the information you're given. So this is slightly trickier than the information retrieval type of free text question, because with those you're looking for the details from the passage. Here you need to use kind of the entire passage in order to conclude what you can from it as a whole. These are what the questions will look like. The bold question at the top is what is implied, because that's really the underlying theme of all of these types of questions. What is suggested, in other words, by the information we are given? So, for example, the success or failure of this thing, the writer's opinion, stance or viewpoint of this thing, what can be inferred about it or relationships between certain ideas, which of the following an author might agree with, or how they view the role of a topic or what they imply about it, or the overall tone of the piece as well. So all things that they're not going to state necessarily in a sentence itself, but they will be making clear through the way that they present the information. Some common pitfalls for this type of question: paraphrasing and synonyms. So because this is based on conclusions, as I said, the sentence itself won't be in the passage. So you'll have to keep your eye out for words that will point you towards the information you're looking for. Those words might be spread out across a passage, with later information contradicting the earlier information. There may be pieces where if you only read one of those passages, you'll be guided to the wrong answer. You'll also want to be careful that the information you're looking at actually follows logically from itself or from each other, so that sentences are linked if they have a link in them through a bridging phrase, like however, consequently, due to, as a result, because oftentimes they put information together through juxtaposition that seem linked but aren't necessarily, so you have to keep an eye out for that. Same with the gaps in information that require conclusions. So sometimes you may have several pieces of information leading you towards your answer, but there is something missing, and that will require your own thinking based on what's been presented and what you have got in order to get to that conclusion. And again, you'll want to avoid relying on outside information, because it's there most of the time to distract you from what you are looking for. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. They're going to be 3 examples based on the same passage, so almost a full question set. And we're going to talk through and pretend like we're taking these questions. And we will then go from there. So this question seems like a pretty good way to start, because it says what best, and again, best is an interesting word within this context, because it's best out of the choices we have, right? It's not the best one in the world, so we need to make do with the fact that we only have 4 choices here. They might not be perfect fits, but there will be one that's better than the others. We're looking for tone, so we're looking for the attitude of the author towards the subject matter, and we're even being guided towards a last paragraph. So let's take a look at that last paragraph, shall we? The author of a major fashion ethics report concluded that consumer awareness alone cannot fix the system. Structural reform, they argued, is necessary to shift the industry toward genuine sustainability. Okay, so this is talking about the conclusions of a report, that it can't fix the system itself, that there is structural reform needed in order to shift the energy and the industry. And we said that this is necessary. Okay. Even the phrase genuine sustainability suggests that this is quite a thoughtful last paragraph talking about ethical fashion movement and what it is actually needed to have a genuine impact. So let's take a look at the options we have. So A, hopeful and celebratory. It does seem hopeful to a certain extent because it's saying that reforms are needed in order to make things better. Celebratory seems a bit of a stretch, doesn't it? Because it doesn't seem like we're celebrating here. It seems like we are focusing on what needs to happen next. So celebratory sounds not quite right. Move myself out of the way here. What needs to happen next? Firm but realistic. Okay, this seems slightly better, doesn't it? Because we're thinking about this word in particular, firm and realistic. If we're thinking about what needs to happen next, the process of improving to get to genuine sustainability, that seems pretty good, doesn't it? Because we're thinking about this as not a simple fix, but rather something that requires both consumer awareness and structural reform. Okay, so this looks like a pretty good answer so far, but let's check the others just in case there's a better one for us. C, sarcastic and mocking. If we look back, this is very neutral language. There's nothing here that seems to suggest mocking or that this is anything other than a earnest description here of what needs to happen. So this doesn't seem right. And then passive and unconcerned. And this may seem a bit of a trick here because passive seems a bit right? They're talking about the two different types of reform that are needed and the different people who need to be involved. It doesn't say, hey, get up and help now. It's not hugely passionate. But let's take a look at that second word, passive and unconcerned. These words need to fit both of them in order for our answer to be correct. And this doesn't sound right, does it? Unconcerned. It appears that the author does care, but that they are aware of the factors at play, right? And the work to be done. So being unconcerned doesn't quite sound right. Doesn't sound like they don't care and that it won't make any difference to them if things don't change. Especially this word genuine, right? Where it says that it appears that they're looking not just for nominal changes, but something that really sticks and influences sustainability. So this seems wrong. Now we are left with just two answers. Hopeful and celebratory, I think because we've said it's more neutral, just seems wrong at this point, even though it started off as quite a good answer. And that leaves us with B, firm and realistic. That seems right. It seems like they're telling us that there are lots of people who need to get involved in order to make this change. And here's what we need to do next. So I'm happy with B as my answer. Question 2, and I will move myself back down to the corner so that you can take a look at these answers. Question 2, how does the author appear to view customer responsibility? Okay, sorry, consumer responsibility. That's what we're looking for, and we're looking for the author's view. So we're looking for their opinion here. The author suggests consumer alone cannot be blamed for unethical fashion. This seems interesting because it says maybe they might have something to do with it, but they can't be fully blamed for unethical fashion. This might be a helpful word to look for as we go, because we've seen ethical quite a few times based on the subject of this piece, but that might be helped. And we maybe also want to keep an eye on blamed, and then any other way, any other place where people are being blamed or ideas are being blamed. The author believes consumers should stop shopping entirely. Again, here a definitive word, entirely, which means that in order for this to be the right answer, we need to see something in the text that suggests that the author is calling on people not to shop at all going forward, which would be quite hard to achieve. We'll take a look for that when we look through the passage. C, the author thinks individual choices outweigh corporate decisions. Okay, so individual choices, that sounds like the consumer. Outweigh corporate decisions. So that means they have more value than corporate decisions. So that would mean that the consumer is being blamed more than companies for unethical fashion. Now, based on what we've read so far, when we skimmed the last paragraph, that doesn't quite seem right. So we'll keep that in mind as we scan through the rest of the paragraph, or the passage, sorry. And then D, the author ignores the role of consumers altogether. So we need to first start off by looking at if the word consumers appears in this passage, because if not, then we have our answer. And if a synonym doesn't appear either, then we certainly have our answer. Ignores sounds very strong, and altogether adds even more strength to that. If they are ignored altogether, that means nothing about the consumer is discussed in this piece. So we already, again, seems like that might not be right based on what we've read so far. So we are scanning, and even in scanning the first sentence, we're looking at things that are starting to contradict some of our options here. Fashion industry has come under increased scrutiny. That seems like a company choice that is under criticism. Fast fashion as well. We're seeing campaigners have called for more reform. We're seeing some brands doing some positive things. And then we're seeing a bridging phrase saying, however, critics. So this seems like it's going to be the next piece where this is negative. Market strategy that gives the appearance of ethical practice without significant change seems wrong. We're seeing quite a lot of negative language here, vague, unregulated, making it hard for consumers to verify claims. Okay, now we're getting somewhere because we're thinking that these companies are actually attempting to do things to assuage this problem, but that these critics are actually steering consumers wrong. And so even the best meaning consumers can't verify that what they're buying is ethical. Now we see a good word here, responsibility, coupled with bears the most responsibility here. This seems like it's going to be key, but if we scan around, as we're meant to do when we see a keyword, there's also debate over this. Okay, so there must be some kind of doubt or question here. Debate, who bears the most responsibility? Companies or consumers? Okay, let's keep looking. Some argue, again, not everyone, just some argue that individuals must shop more mindfully, avoiding impulse. Okay. Others point out that many consumers lack time, money, knowledge. Okay. So let's keep scanning the fashion movements. Their impact remains limited. Large-scale change may require. Okay. And here we're not seeing anything about the consumer anymore. We're seeing change that needs to come from corporate jobs and corporate decisions. I'm hearing some of the language in the question in the passage now that I read the keywords first. The author, we saw this part earlier, concluded consumer awareness alone cannot fix this. So no matter how hard they try, consumers can't do this on their own. They said structural reform is necessary to shift the industry. Okay, so someone else is at play here. This is probably the companies or the government need to change, and the consumer can't be blamed for it. So let's look back at our answers and think about this. The author A suggests consumers alone cannot be blamed for unethical fashion. Okay, that sounds pretty good so far, because there are lots of options at play here. So we're going to hang on to that one for a sec. The author believes consumers should stop shopping entirely. Doesn't say that, right? And it says that even the consumers who are trying to be mindful are sometimes guided wrong by the companies. So not B. C, the author thinks individual choices outweigh corporate decisions. Now, this is a flip way around of what it sounds like, right? This sounds like the opposite of the last paragraph, in that this statement is saying that the consumer's responsibility is more than the company's, which we can say is the opposite. And the author ignores the role of consumers entirely. Not true, because they're talking about the consumers quite a lot across the passage. So that leaves us with our only option, our only option A suggests that consumers alone can not be blamed for unethical fashion. Final question here. Which of the following statements, if true, would most weaken the argument that stricter regulations are necessary for genuine sustainability? Okay, so stricter regulations, genuine sustainability. We know that that was a keyword phrase we'd seen in another paragraph or in another question. Here, genuine sustainability, let's read around. Conclusion that awareness alone cannot fix, and they need to shift the industry through structural reform. So we're looking for things that would disprove that stricter regulations are important. So let's look at the options and then look back at the passage. Many brands voluntarily adopt more sustainable practices when pressured by consumers. Would this mean that the regulations are not necessary? Somewhat, yes, right? If many brands actually are doing this work on their own when pressured by consumers and not by regulation. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's come back to that one. B, countries with strict regulations have reduced fast fashion's environmental impact. So we have to be careful here, because this sounds right. We've seen this in the passage, right? That strict regulations are important for genuine sustainability, that fast fashion, which we saw here, is linked to negative environmental impact, and that campaigners have tried to sort this, as well as the fact that it's been under scrutiny as a result. Now, if we were trying to rush through, we hadn't noticed or remembered that the question is asking us for the weakness, we might think, oh, this is the right answer, because that would help prove that stricter regulations are necessary if strict regulations work by reducing the impact, which we know is severe. So this is actually the flip way round of what we're looking to prove. So that's not right. C, companies often ignore voluntary codes of conduct without legal enforcement. Okay, if they ignore the voluntary things without legal enforcement, that suggests that they would need legal enforcement or some kind of regulation in order to comply with codes of conduct. So again, that seems like the flip way round, that if we're trying to prove that it strengthens the argument we would want to use, but again, it does not weaken it, it strengthens it. So this is wrong for us. And then D, consumer awareness campaigns have failed to change purchasing patterns. This doesn't sound right, because we have got some information here about campaigners calling for more change, and we have got people attempting to try and help it, particularly here with trying to have people accept the role and responsibility they play in trying to reduce the environmental impact of fast fashion and the fashion industry. But it doesn't say anything about these campaigns actually changing or failing to change the patterns. We don't really know based on this passage alone. So we can't say this, which leads us back to A being our answer, that to weaken the argument that stricter regulations are necessary for genuine sustainability, that if things comply voluntarily, if brands comply voluntarily with sustainable practice when pressured by consumers, they may not need, want, or continue to do this if they are given stricter regulations. That's the end of this worked example video. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and I will see you in the next worked example video. Bye for now.